When I first opened my Bible to the lectionary passage from Mark's Gospel this week, I had the strong and sudden sense of just having preached this very text, with Jesus' disciples bickering over who's his favorite or who gets the most valuable disciple trophy or something. A quick look back partially confirmed my suspicions. 4 weeks ago, we read in Mark chapter 9 of Jesus' disciples arguing among themselves who was the greatest. And then today, we find James and John pulling Jesus off to the side and asking for special recognition. Grant that we may sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. It paints a deeply unflattering picture. Jesus trying again and again and again to tell his disciples that he's about to die, that his time with them is nearly at an end, forewarning that his reception in Jerusalem will be more tragic than triumphal. Today's scripture is the third time in Mark that Jesus has forewarned them of his coming death, and they don't listen, they don't hear it, they don't get it. We who know the end of the story can readily weigh Jesus' closest followers in the balance and find them wanting. It seems that the disciples are heavily into wishful thinking, convinced that when Jesus speaks of the Son of Man coming in his glory, as he does in Mark chapter 8, he's speaking of some sort of messianic military coup. Despite his continuing words to the contrary, they expect Jesus to pull some sort of rabbit out of his hat when they arrive in Jerusalem. They seem to be setting out place cards for seating at the victory banquet, with James and John lining themselves up for the prime seats. The other disciples are angry at their audacity, maybe even angry that they didn't ask for the privilege first. At least that's how I've always read our text. But this week, I read afresh this particular part of the passage. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem. So to set the context, we're getting pretty close to the end game. Jerusalem and whatever is going to happen there is a scant 20 miles away at this point. Jesus was walking ahead of them, Mark continues. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. They were amazed. By what? By this man they follow who is clearly human and yet like no human they've ever known? A healer, a holy man, a stiller of storms, a mystic, a Messiah who seems to defy expectations rather than fulfill them? A man who speaks with authority beyond all the religious authorities. A man they know so well and yet somehow don't know at all. And those who followed were afraid. And again, afraid of what? Maybe Jesus' followers aren't quite as dense as we have assumed. Maybe the dire warnings and the foreshadowing of Jesus' passion haven't fallen entirely on deaf ears. Maybe the disciples have some sense of the gathering storm. After all, they've seen the escalating tension between Jesus and the religious authorities. Maybe they are following him because they believe him to be the Messiah, but they cannot conceive of the end game. In other words, they see very clearly the possibility of his dying, just as he says. But they have no earthly idea what he means when he says that he will rise. And if they aren't truly afraid before Jesus' next words, his final passion prediction is chilling. See, we are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. And they will hand him over to the Gentiles, that is, the Romans. They will mock him, and spit upon him, and flog him, and kill him. There's every reason to believe that that is true. And then what? What of his kingdom? What of his followers? After 3 days, he will rise again. And we agree that there's every reason to doubt that is true, to wonder how it could possibly be true. Isn't there ample reason for Jesus' followers to say at best, I believe, but help my unbelief? Jesus' followers are amazed and they are afraid. Afraid of how all this ends. Scared that maybe, just maybe, the kingdom doesn't come. Now, for some reason, this tapping into the fears of Jesus' followers makes what happens next a bit more sympathetic to me. James and John, the Zebedee brothers, who were among the first that Jesus called, so they've been with him from day one, we might say, come to Jesus. They come together, so obviously they've been talking about it, and they come with a very childlike request. Teacher, we want you to do whatever it is we ask of you. They're afraid to ask what they're about to ask, so they're asking him to say yes before they even ask the question. One can almost hear, Teacher, there's something we need to ask. Jesus replies, perhaps reading something beneath their awkwardness. What is it that you want me to do for you? And they reply with something that must sound outrageous and presumptuous even to their own ears once it's spoken aloud. Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. We don't know how or when your glory comes about. Just promise us we'll be there, right beside you. We don't know what's coming. But promise us that there's somehow some reward at the end of it all and that the following isn't for naught. Offer us some surety, some security as we set our faces toward Jerusalem. Because we're scared. Well, if we're willing to continue with a sympathetic reading, then Jesus' reply to the brothers is both compassionate and true. You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? We know that these are metaphors for Jesus' death. Recall that in Gethsemane, Jesus prays, "It is possible, let this cup pass from me." So James and John don't mistake his meaning. Are you able to follow me to the death? And they reply, "You're able." And in the moment, they believe it with all their hearts. To which Jesus responds, "The cup I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant. It is for those for whom it has been prepared." And we, with the benefit of hindsight, can know Jesus' meaning. Jesus' glory is not a throne in this world or the next, but a cross. And the two who will be at his right hand and at his left hand when he comes into his glory are revealed in Mark 15:27. And with him they crucified two bandits, one at his right and one at his left. As the other disciples express anger at James and John for their presumptuous request, Jesus offers a final bit of teaching. You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and the ones they call great are tyrants over them. But it's not so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be the slave of all, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So this is one final teaching, one final word. I know it's scary. The kingdom won't come by outroaming the Romans or overpowering the powers. There is no such thing as redemptive violence, as good overpowering evil. There is only redemptive suffering, good enduring despite evil. Now, if that's a faithful reading of the text, and perhaps instead of ridiculing the disciples in their ignorance, we might instead join them in their amazement and fear. Because following Jesus, genuinely following Jesus, is no easy road. It will not lead to wealth and privilege, will not result in glory or fame. It will always and inevitably lead us to the hard places and the humble places and the hungry places and the hurting places of the world. It will challenge us to make their suffering our own. That is, to share in it, to care for it, and not to turn aside from it. It will take us wherever injustice resides and make us the voices that speak up and speak out. As Charles Campbell, the recently retired professor of homiletics at Duke Divinity School, notes, being baptized, as we are, involves entering into the way of the cross, taking up the cross and following Jesus. Similarly, sharing the cup at the table invites the community of faith into the way of the crucified Jesus. The central liturgical practices of the church, baptism and communion, challenge all fear-driven requests for security and call the church into the alternative way of Jesus, the way of servanthood. Following the way of the cross will inevitably lead to confrontation with the systems that exercise control, that determine who is in and who is out, who is honored and who is shamed, who profits and who loses. It may look like crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, even knowing that tear gas and billy clubs await. It may look like standing up to a bully in the lunchroom or in the boardroom. It may look like pressing peacefully for fair wages or affordable health care for all. It may look like taking in the refugees that unjust power drives out. But it will never look like security, because the prosperity gospel is not the gospel. Rather, it will look like watching for God's kingdom and waiting for God's kingdom and working for God's kingdom until the kingdom comes. We follow the one who has said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me, find it." The kingdom's not a sugar pill. It's far sweeter.